So now you know the 6 biggest economies on planet Earth, the 6 richest nations, from the US all the way to the UK. But what are we basing that off of? How do we determine that? Who made them the 6 richest in charge? It's a very easy measure that everybody's heard of. It's good for you. It's good for me. Hey, it ain't gross. It's GDP. You got to love okay. Gross domestic product, the GDP. It's the most magical of measures of wealth that almost everybody uses and recognizes all over the planet. But what the hell is it? The gross domestic product for any country is the sum total of all the goods and all the services produced and sold in that country in one calendar year. And it's everything. All finished goods sold to consumers, all services provided to everybody. Kablamo. You gotta look at it like everything's sold in every Walmart, and every grocery store, and every car lot, and every wage and every salary that everybody got paid. Smash it all into one number, and that's the GDP. Supposed to kind of be a measure of how much stuff this society produced in one year and thus how rich they are. Woohoo! They did a lot of stuff. Look at their huge GDP. Yes. But I know some economists are out there already rolling over going, that's not exactly right. That doesn't account for, multinational corporations' profits overseas and profits on dividends from your stock market. I'm not worried about all that. I'm a generalist. This is generally GDP is pretty much all goods and services produced in the society in one year. I'm actually much more concerned with what it doesn't count. What does GDP not include? It doesn't really include anything that doesn't have a monetary value attached to it. Stuff like housework, child rearing, growing food for yourself, for your own consumption. I mean, you're not buying it or selling it, you're just going to grow it and eat it. All the stuff that people do to stay alive in many parts of the world, like collect firewood, build their own houses, collect water, cook, all that stuff. It's work, it's labor, and a lot of people spend a hell of a lot of their time doing it. Not counted is the GDP anywhere. Just doesn't happen. So none of that. You may have worked your ass off, but ain't counted for us. Also, anything that's kind of underground, that there may be monetary transactions, but no one really knows about it. I'm thinking about the black market, or a flea market, or a yard sale, or bartering between friends, or even enemies. Hell, I don't care. But anything that the government don't know about, that didn't go through a cash register and there was a tax levied on it, nobody knows about it. They can't count that stuff for GDP either. And speaking about stuff that they can't count because nobody knows about it, illegal activities are not counted as part of GDP. Dope, crack, smoke, blow, heroin, all that stuff, plus other illegal activities like slave trading and sexual underground slave trading and mafia activities. Those are all illicit, illegal activities. Nobody knows about it. They're not taxed. The government don't know, so no. That stuff does not go into GDP either. And that's worthy to consider for a second more, because that wildly does change how you might view a place like, say Colombia or even Mexico. These are states that if cocaine was counted as part of the legitimate economy and taxed, they would be richer than Midas. I mean, there's tremendous value in some of those illegal narco activities that provide billions to the economy of these countries. And I'm talking not just this greasy scumlords who are running the show, but money on the street. Smugglers and people, all this money gets moved around and people buy goods and services with it, but it's not counted. So Mexico, Colombia, other narco states would be rich as hell if you counted some of these activities. So pretty much anything that the government don't know about and doesn't tax is not counted as part of GDP. Well, let's look at some GDP totals for the world then, shall we? This map is showing you the gross domestic product for the entire world. The top tier in the dark green are those economies worth more than $2 trillion. If you look at the legend, it says 2,000 billion. That's 2 trillion. That's a 2 with a hell ton of zeros after it. And this is in US dollars, by the way. And you see the big countries, which we've already explicitly outlined. The United States is, of course, the largest economy on planet Earth at $14 trillion. There's not even a close second with that. And really, you could take the next 5 biggest economies and add them together, and they would equal the U.S. economy. And those economies are, of course, China, Japan, Germany, France, the UK. Italy's right up there, although they're just below the 2 trillion mark. So the next tier down actually is in light green, and that's 250 billion US dollars to 2 trillion. And you have some interesting countries in here from across the globe. Of course, Canada and all those other European countries are in this next to top tier, but other countries like Saudi Arabia, with about $370 billion economy on average every year. Turkey, 615. Mexico, 875 billion. Indonesia, 540 billion. Brazil, $1.6 trillion economy. So there are some other heavyweights out there in that second tier. You see Argentina, Venezuela, and other countries in there as well, like Australia. The rest of the map I'll leave to you to take a look at. You can pause and look at some patterns if you like. But of course, we'll pick out the bottom category, those countries worth less than $60 billion a year, their total economy less than $60 billion a year. And of course, Africa gets lit up in the red, as do some countries in South America, Mongolia, parts of Central Asia, Burma, Cambodia, Laos, Papua New Guinea. Yeah, those economies not worth a whole hell of a lot. But is this total, taking this one number, this total wealth measurement, is this really the best indicator of how well off a state is? How developed or developing they are? How good the state's doing? How well the average citizen's doing? Perhaps not. And look again at these countries in particular, China, India, Nigeria, and then also Australia and Canada. Take a look again. You see China and India, top tier, yeah. And Canada and Australia, okay, they're the second tier. Oh, and Nigeria's second tier too. They're doing pretty good. But what happens if we were to back off this map and look at GDP per capita? What's that mean? You take that total GDP and you per capita, capita's head, all right, per person. You take the total population of the society and you divide the GDP by the number of people that are there. And that gives you this map. And this is perhaps a much better indicator because you're breaking it down by how many people are in that society. It's a rough indicator of wealth per person per year. And when you start to look at the pattern here, well, you see a lot of similarities between the GDP total map and the GDP per capita map, like the United States, like most of Western Europe, like a lot of the middle tier, second tier countries are still doing well. But what happened to China, India, and Nigeria? Oh no! Those economies were worth a whole hell ton of money when you're looking at the GDP total, but when you break it down by their huge populations to the per person level, they ain't doing so well. China bumps down to the $3,000 to $10,000 per year on average per person. Nigeria and India went even lower, $800 to $3,000 per year, per person on average in that orange color. Yeah, the rich countries do hold their own, like US, Japan, UK, France, Germany. They're still up in the $30,000 to $118,000 per year on average. Yeah, that's where the money is. And that brings me to Canada and Australia. What happened to them? They went the opposite way that Nigeria did. Yes, their economies are big, worth somewhere between 250 billion to 2 trillion. But what happens when you do it per capita? Wow, they jump right up to the top. Their average salaries, let's say, or average wages are up in the $30,000, $118,000, like the real rich countries. What happened there? Because Canada and Australia don't got any people. They're very low populated areas. So just like China and India have a huge amount of people that you have to divide that number by, brings them down per capita, Australia and Canada the reverse. They have a big number and not many people. So the number gets bigger per person. See how that works? So there you go. The states with the biggest GDP or the biggest GDP per capita are obviously then just the most awesome, richest, best places in the world. Or are they? most textbooks and classes and professors and analysts seem absolutely fixated on this GDP like it's some sort of holy grail of wealth measurement. And the GDP per capita is actually even more used as an indicator of standard of living. So people say, oh, well, you know, your average salary in this country is $30,000 a year. Oh, they're doing really well. Is that really true? Really? I mean, what's the problem with using these measures to define life on the planet for these folks in different states? To me, the problem is trifold. It's based on this whole concept that GDP is legitimate consumption. And that's all it is. It's only legitimate consumption. And let me break down both words to tell you why it's problematic for both of these. Legitimate means that it misses all those things which we've already talked about. Okay? It doesn't take into account underground activities, narco activities, housework, homework. And that wildly undervalues what's really happening in most poor countries and drug countries on planet Earth. I mean, you look at those African countries like, holy shit, they're making like, what, $20 a year on average. Everybody's just sitting around picking flies off themselves, ain't doing no work, doing nothing. Those people are working exceptionally hard, but none of it's counted in this Western measure. None of it. And I already talked about Mexico and Colombia. Their numbers would be way higher, and there's a lot more wealth on the streets, but none of that is counted because of the nature of the measurement itself. It only does legitimate. So what about the consumption part that I have a problem with? GDP is consumption-based measure. Why would the amount of crap that people buy be synonymous with how good their lives are? Think about that. Does GDP account for how healthy you are, your education, your satisfaction with your own life, personal freedoms or liberties? Nope. No. It don't care about none of that stuff. We only measure all the shit people buy, and the more shit, the better off you are. More shit equals more quality of life. That's if you buy into the whole GDP thing. That's the only thing it's measuring. Shit people buy. More trinkets, you must be happier. And I think modern times in the United States right now is slamming people in the face with cold reality that the amount of material crapola you own perhaps is not equating to happiness or standards of living or how well off you are. Maybe not even close anymore. The third problem I have with GDP is it does not account for wealth disparity. Wealth disparity, what's that? That's kind of the measure of pretty much how equally the wealth is distributed into the society. Wealth disparity, increased wealth disparity means that very few people own almost everything and the masses have virtually nothing. That would be high wealth disparity. It would be low wealth disparity if everything was kind of equal, if everybody was worth about the same amount of money, had about the same amount of stuff. GDP does not account for that at all. It only takes a total for the whole state. So you have something I call the Bill Gates effect. I love just making up shit. And the Bill Gates effect kind of goes something like this. Let's pretend if we were in the classroom, there was 1,000 people in the classroom, and we were going to measure the average GDP for all of us, GDP per capita. We're going to total up all the stuff that we've ever bought and sold and all our wages, and then divide it by the number of people and say, okay, well, here's the average level of wealth in this classroom with 1,000 people. Well, you're 1,000 college students. How much did you make last year? What were the wages you made? 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand? You doing okay? And, you know, I'm a college professor. I make $4,500 a year. So if we averaged up all of us 1,000 people in this room, we'd come up with a number like, I don't know, say $18,000 a year. Just pick a number out of a hat. What would happen, though, if we invited Bill Gates into the classroom and we kicked out one person and we said, get the hell out of here. Bill Gates is coming. You give him your seat. And Bill Gates sat down. And then we recalculate our GDP per capita. What happens? Woohoo! We all rich, bitches! That's what just happened, because he's worth like $1 billion. And so that wildly inflates even the per capita average for everybody. The total, of course, would go through the roof when we include Bill Gates' salary. But even when you divide it by the 1,000 people in the room, it would look like all of us were millionaires because we would by that measure. See how that works? And this, while that little scenario, of course, is fake, although Bill Gates, if you're out there watching, bring it on to my classroom, boy, let's do this. This actually really happens in real life. And so the GDP or the GDP per capita is of no value. And I'm thinking of particular countries like Equatorial Guinea. Yeah, I know, you don't have any idea where the hell that's at. It's a dank-ass little country in Equatorial Africa. Go figure, Equatorial Guinea. And the whole country has been found out to be sitting on an oil well in the last 20 years. So they've been pumping up oil like never before. And they've been making billions of dollars. And it's a small country. So you'd be like, oh, billions of dollars a year, that's pretty good. They must be doing pretty good. And if you looked at the GDP, it'd still be in the low category, but it's a small country. It'd be like 60 or 70 billion dollars a year. But then you break it down per capita because it's not a huge population, and you're like, wow, those people are doing really well. Look at that GDP per capita for Equatorial Guinea's top tier. They're up there with the United States and Western Europe and Japan. They must be doing great. Not. Equatorial Guinea is run by a dictator, a complete thief who has stolen every single dime from the country and put it into his personal bank account. He is the Bill Gates of his country. So actually, while this little country, Equatorial Guinea, by all measures of wealth, GDP, GDP per capita, and a bunch of other stuff, looks like it's been getting richer and richer and richer, the average person is actually getting poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer and starving to death and dying. Those Western measures of wealth do nothing for totalitarian dictatorships, and Burma would fall into this. Any place where you have a small group of people that control all the cards, they have all the wealth. The people don't. So these measures don't really measure anything. But also very oil-rich countries or resource-rich countries like Saudi Arabia, like a lot of the Middle Eastern states, they have a group of people at the top who are ultra billionaires that kind of skew the numbers up higher than they really should be. So you need to consider all this stuff if you truly want to understand where are the rich countries versus the poorer countries? Who is doing well off? Who does have the best standards of living on planet Earth? And that brings me to finish this little section with, how else might you better measure how well society is doing? How wealthy people really are? I just don't like the GDP. It's just based on buying shit. It's consumption. That's not really reflecting what's happening with folks. What would be a better measure? Perhaps some other ones that are out there. One called HDI from the United Nations, Human Development Index, and it factors in real other stuff that's kind of important, like your life expectancy, your education levels, your diet. You get a nutritional diet every day. That's kind of important, isn't it? The infant mortality, and a host of other quality of life factors to determine how good life is for people in the state, for the average person in each of those states. You can look up the HDI map and look up HDI factor and see what it's all about. And that's perhaps a better judge of how well the state is doing than just raw sales. Another one that I've heard about and read about several places, I think is hilarious, is actually a fatness index. I know. But think about it. Obesity rates skyrocket in countries that not just get rich, GDP-wise, but get rich across the board. So if you have just one or two Bill Gates, like in Equatorial Guinea, right? The average person there is starving to death. So they ain't getting fat. But if you have a society like the United States or France, where the wealth is evenly distributed all over the place and everybody's rich, then everybody can consume more, and lots of people consume more food and they get fat. So yes, there is an actual fatness index that measures how well society's doing by how obese they're getting. It's crazy, but it's actually a pretty decent measure. And by the way, China's going through the roof for obesity rates right now. Many of these rich Asian countries or countries in Asia that are getting richer, who have been lean for years, struggling and just trying to get by, suddenly you're seeing obesity rise and heart disease rise and diabetes rise, and they've never even had this stuff before. It's actually not a bad measure of how well people are doing, is kind of the bad diseases that crop up when you do well. Now, the last one I really like too is gross national happiness. I love it. You think I'm making this one up too? I'm not. Gross national happiness is just too awesome. And actually, French President Nicolas Sarkozy is a big fan. He wants to convert France to gross national happiness. Oh, savoir-faire. And this is actually starting to get some play in other countries too. And this kind of takes not just GDP per capita, but quality of life, social progress, human rights and liberties, personal satisfaction, levels of health per person, living standards, and you mix all of that together, and how happy are people here? Isn't that ultimately the measure of wealth? Whether you have a dime or $1 billion, if you're just as happy with a dime as you are with $1 billion, isn't your state doing good if everybody's happy with what they got? And there are some surprising results with these happiness measures and happiness indexes, because and the reason I like to bring this up is just because there's people that are impoverished, poor in parts of the world, don't assume they're miserable. They can be very happy with a hell of a lot less than you got. So most of you are in the rich countries and you're like, oh my God, I've seen those impoverished people living in Africa or in India or in China. How do they do it? I mean, they don't even have a TV or electricity or running water or a Nintendo. Oh, they don't have a Wii. How do they stay alive? People really don't know what they miss in many parts of the world, and they work hard, and they got their family, and people have been going and doing surveys, and actually one of the most happiest nations on the planet routinely is Nigeria. And many other African states where many people say, obviously we don't have the levels of wealth of Western Europe and the United States, but we're happy. And if we're happy, what the hell does the rest of it even matter? So consider these other factors when determining how well off, how truly rich different states are around the world. And let's end on that happy note, happiness index, and turn to finishing up our economic world tour by looking at world economic growth rates and how you too can predict the future economies in the world.